in the days before the pharaohs, in the days long before history was even recorded. They were intelligent men like us, geniuses. They had their Einsteins, they had their Newtons. And these men needed to understand their existence, needed to understand the cosmos around them. But rather than be provided with the technology and science to do so, they used their genius and intelligence to search within. They employed another aspect of thinking which we ourselves have long forgotten. They employ the intuitive, inner, spiritual search. Osiris King, may you traverse the Milky Way, the winding waterway. May the afterworld take your hand to the place where Orion is.
At the dawn of history, 2,500 years before Christ, an entire civilization gathered to build the greatest monuments on Earth. 13 million tons of solid rock, enough to build the city of London, were hauled across the deserts. Why? What vision drove this? Scholars say they served as tombs for 3 dead pharaohs. Robert Bauval, British author and researcher, born in Alexandria, spent much of his life in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. He believes there is a far greater vision behind these pyramids. Over the last 20 years, he quested for that greater meaning, echoed in ancient whispers of stars, of myths, and the beginning as Egypt saw it. In the beginning there was darkness and an ocean of chaos. From it emerged a mound, and on it rose the sun, Ra. Then the Bennu bird, the phoenix, flew up, and its first cry set the world in motion. In that place later stood the holy city of Heliopolis, around a pillar crowned with the holy Benben, symbol of that first mound of creation.
This is all that remains of the city of Heliopolis, once the most holy of cities of the ancient world. In this desecrated pit was the sacred temple of the sun, the temple of the phoenix. And here came the Greek scholars, Pythagoras, Plato, Solon, to fall at the feet of the great Egyptian initiates.
Heliopolis was written with this hieroglyph, a pillar with a cross on top.
The ancient Egyptians called this Inu, the city of the pillar. We know from ancient inscriptions that here stood an ancient sacred pillar, long before the construction of the Pyramid of Giza. We know that also on top of this pillar was probably placed a very sacred relic they called the Benben. Now, the Benben was shaped like a cone or a pyramid. This was the cross of ancient Egypt. This was the most holy of symbols.
Such a symbol still lies in Cairo Museum, the polished capstone of a pyramid. The high priests of Heliopolis were second only to the pharaohs. They were renowned as builders, magicians, healers, and astronomers. One is known by name, Imhotep, who would later be venerated by the Greeks as Asclepios, the father of medicine. But he is also mentioned for his knowledge of the stars and as the ground layer of the Great Pyramids. Did knowledge of the stars come into their building?
Scholars say that the ancient Egyptians did not have a high knowledge of astronomy, but here is evidence of their fascination and sophisticated knowledge of the sky. Look at the zodiac constellation: Leo, Taurus, Pisces, and here the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius.
Many civilizations give a special place to the constellation of Orion. Before the horns of Taurus, he stands as the great hunter with his belt of 3 stars. To the Egyptians, he was Osiris, god of afterlife, and he is closely linked to the pyramids. Bauval was to find out how close.
Everything here attests to a grand unified plan, a master plan. And yet there's something very perplexing about this plan. We have 3 pyramids, 2 of which are of almost identical size and are set along a diagonal line. And yet here's the curious thing. The 3rd pyramid is much smaller and is offset to the left of this diagonal line. Why? What were the pyramid builders trying to do? The problem had been nagging me for years, and on a night like this, sitting in the desert with a friend of mine, he was telling me how the star Sirius would rise, and then he pointed in the sky and showed me the belt of Orion right above. And he said, you notice how the 3 stars run in a row, but at the top star, the smaller star, is slightly offset to the left. And suddenly I had it.
Bauval knew 2 other pyramids nearby also carried star names, and what he saw was stunning. Orion, the god Osiris, stood in heaven as on earth. But something didn't fit. The Egyptians saw the Nile as the Milky Way, and evidently the pyramids as Orion. But in the Pyramid Age, Milky Way and Orion stood differently in relation to each other, and he found the computer was looking at the wrong epoch.
Now, in order to get a perfect match with the pyramids on the ground, the sky needs to be rotated slightly anti-clockwise. This means going back in time, 3000 BC, 4000 BC, 5000 BC.
The position of the star changes through time through the phenomenon of precession. The Earth not only turns each day, as with a giant top, its axis also makes a slow wobble every 26,000 years. On Earth, this makes the star seem go slowly up and down throughout millennia.
7,000, 8,000, 9, 10.
It's absolutely amazing.
Well, the whole arrangement freezes the time of 10,500 BC.
The Milky Way now fitted precisely as the Nile. The builders were pointing to a distant past when Orion rose for its slow ascent through heavens, their mythical first time when the gods ruled and everything began. Another enigma. In the Great Pyramid, strange narrow shafts point upward. For ventilation, science suggested.
There's no way these could have been ventilation shafts. The detail of design is far too complicated. They rise on the incline all the way out of the pyramid. They must have had a much higher purpose.
Astronomers had already found that these shafts were directed to the Small Dipper and Alpha Draconis, the polar star of early antiquity.
Now, they obviously didn't go to all this trouble just for fun. To the ancient Egyptian, Orion was Osiris, the high god of resurrection. Now, this is a reconstruction of the sky in 2500 BC. And let's see what happens to Orion's belt as it crosses the north-south line.
The shaft from the king's chamber pointed at Orion, the god Osiris.
Now, to the left of Orion, here is the star Sirius. To the ancient Egyptians, it was the star of Isis, the consort of Osiris. And I was amazed to discover this.
Bauval discovered that the last shaft pointed at Sirius, star of the goddess Isis. The ancient Egyptians were making pathways to their Isis and Osiris, their gods of afterlife and resurrection, and gods from their beginning.
The Egyptians emphatically believed in a golden age, when the gods ruled the earth. 4 children came out of the womb of the sky goddess. 4 human-shaped children, 2 of which were Isis and Osiris. And they established a kingdom of the first time. They called it Zep-Tepi. This was a golden age when the gods ruled the earth and brought knowledge and civilization. The balance between the cosmos and the earth was perfect, and happiness ruled the land.
a golden time in which Osiris ruled. But Seth, his brother, grew jealous, betrayed and killed Osiris. The world fell prey to chaos as Set cut up the body of Osiris and hid each of its 14 pieces. Blood and darkness came over Egypt. But Isis, faithful consort of Osiris, searched every corner of the land, gathered the parts of her beloved, and bound them in linen.
However, she could not find the phallus, and she fabricated a golden phallus from which she impregnated herself with the seed of Osiris and bore a son, the son Horus, the divine child. It is Horus that became the first established man-god, first pharaoh to rule Egypt. And all pharaohs that followed believed themselves to be reincarnated entities of Horus.
Horus with the falcon head avenged his father, conquered evil and slew Seth. And Isis and Osiris reincarnated in heaven where both stand as rulers of the night and afterlife. Osiris as Orion and Isis as the star Sirius.
One cannot overemphasize the importance of the star Sirius. Sirius was Isis, the life-giving force of Egypt. The star performs a very, very specific cycle. It is not only the brightest star in the northern hemisphere, in the whole sky. It wasn't because the star was beautiful and brilliant that the Egyptian venerated it, but it would disappear. Orion and Sirius would disappear for a period of 70 days. Now this is extremely interesting because the period of 70 days was also the period of embalmment. When they would mummify a king, they would take 70 days to perform the ritual. And therefore it's clear that they associated it to the disappearance of the stars for 70 days. 70 days they waited in mourning and in expectation and in fear that the star would not reappear and Egypt would not be reborn again. But then on a magical day that occurred at the summer solstice, 70 days later, the star would pop over the eastern horizon this time at dawn, just a few seconds before sunrise. And this sparkle, this spark of life, of the appearance of the star, was the greatest moment in the Egyptian cultic belief.
For at that same moment the river Nile swelled from monsoon rains in a distant, unknown south. The Nile floods brought new life to a parched land. For Egypt, this was the yearly rebirth, so crucial that it took it as the start of its new year.
This miraculous conjunction of summer solstice sunrise, of the rebirth of Sirius at dawn after this long invisibility, and the flooding of the Nile was the great vision that the Egyptians had about rebirth. And they imagined their god Osiris in the sky, looking down on his creation, looking down on Egypt, looking down at the rising of the star. And the creation that he sees is not only the star rising, but the rebirth of Egypt. And this spark of life was, in their mind, transferable to the goddess Isis giving birth to Horus, the divine child which represented Egypt. So it is the star that encapsulates the very essence of Egypt, the very essence of its yearly rebirth. Now, here we have a divine mother bearing the divine child associated to a star in the east. Interestingly, the same concept appears again 3,000 years later in a completely new cult. Or is it a completely new cult?
Bauval's insights shed new light on the magical death rites for the pharaoh, child of Horus, as the builders of the pyramids envisaged. After 70 days, the mummy was taken west to the land across the Nile, the Giza necropolis. As one crosses the Milky Way to Orion's belt, where the pyramids stand as the gateway to Isis and Osiris, gods of life after death.
I'm taking you inside the Pyramid of Unas. Here are the oldest religious writings in history, the pyramid texts. The meaning of these texts were nearly forgotten because Egyptologists saw in them mainly a sun religion. But this isn't a religion of the day and the living. This is a religion of the night and of the dead. These texts repeatedly tell us that the king becomes a star in the kingdom of Osiris in the constellation of Orion. One of these texts says, "May you traverse the winding waterway, the Milky Way, and may you go to the place where Orion is." Now, when a pharaoh died, his body was mummified and prepared like Osiris, and his soul was ready to ascend to the sky. But before this would happen, the dead king had to ensure that the power of divine rule was passed on to his son, the living Horus. This would happen in a very dramatic ceremony called the opening of the mouth, during which ceremonial tools were used to open the mouth of the mummy and bring it back to life. Then an artificial phallus was placed on the mummy, and the dead king was directed towards the star of Isis, the star Sirius. It was then that the seeding of the womb of the goddess took place. His earthly mission fulfilled, and the dead king would depart to the sky. In effect, what we have here is a reenactment of the resurrection myth of Osiris told in stellar terms.
In ancient Egypt, this was Rostau, entrance to the underworld, kingdom of Osiris and gateway to afterlife, a place where mystery reigns, up until today. So far, scientists saw little more than tombs for 3 dead pharaohs, but the realization grows that this was much, much more. Deep in this shaft, Egypt's top archaeologist is excavating corridors and caves which bring the Osiris myth further alive.
This became a sacred place to the Egyptians. People wanted to be buried here, to be connected with this god Osiris. We are now 30 meters underneath the ground, between the Sphinx exactly and the second pyramid. We found remains of 4 pillars like this one. In between there is water, underneath the water there is the sarcophagus, above the sarcophagus was that lid. When I looked inside the sarcophagus, we did not find anything. But why? He's not buried here, but symbolically his spirit is here. They could know that this is the tomb of Osiris. And this really is a symbolic burial, a cenotaph for Osiris. And it's very unique. And it became legend later that many people will be having a small statuette made of wood and then erection in it, and they mummify this, and erection means resurrection, because Osiris is the god of resurrection. He was killed by the devil, Seth, but Isis cried. Her tear made the river Nile, and she restored his erection that she could not find, and she had the son from him, Horus the victorious, who conquered the devil. This myth built the Egyptian civilization. Without Isis, there is no river Nile. The river Nile gave fertility to the land. Without the river Nile, there is no Egypt. And also, the story tells us the devil always has to be conquered.
Much more than tombs for dead pharaohs, this was the grandiose expression of a civilization with a cosmic vision that probed death and reached for resurrection through magical rites and initiation.
The whole focus of the Egyptian cult, the whole idea of the initiatory cult, of the mystical cult, is to learn how to perform this transfiguration and journey into the afterlife and become part of the Osirian afterlife kingdom. Osiris was the constellation of Orion. They called this Sahu. Strangely enough, the name Sahu means to become a spiritual being, an astral being. They gave the name to the mummy. We have named mummies, but the mummy in ancient Egypt was called Sahu. To become a Sahu is to become a mummy, but it's also to become a spiritualized entity, to become Orion. The same way we say to join Christ, or to become Christ-like after death.
Are the Giza pyramids an attempt to reach beyond death? New insights gain ground.
They were an actual model on the ground of the region of the sky through which your soul is expected to travel. So they were a place of initiation, a place of preparation into the mystery of what lies beyond death.
You know, the Egyptians really thought about mystery and initiation. At Giza Plateau, there is many tunnels. Underneath the pyramid, there is tunnels. Giza Plateau was known as Neb Rastau. Rastau means cemetery, but literally it means the underground tunnels. The Giza Plateau was known in the New Kingdom by the name the place of Osiris. Giza is the place of the god Osiris, who's lord of the underground tunnels. And this is why, in my opinion, they came here and they cut that shaft. And that shaft, is it going to the Great Pyramid or not?
There may yet be work galore ahead for archaeologists. What lies under the Sphinx, where seismographs detected several cavities, do they harbor further secrets of the earliest origins of civilization? Were people initiated here into the mysteries of what awaits us all?
I believe that they were primarily intended to be experienced by the living and to have a transformatory effect upon the living, from which they would emerge stronger and more equipped for this terrible and terrifying journey that must be made after death. That, to me, makes sense of the whole enterprise.
Initiated into the mysteries of silence and stillness. The one thing you were never allowed to do was to talk about it. And oddly enough, no one ever did. All we know is that they passed through the portals of death. If you like, a preview of death. It was being taken through anything which involves the emotions, both fear, panic, love, simply to push this person to the point where they break through all that is not truly them, so that the true person beneath the social overlay can emerge.
A place where men stood eye to eye with a god. Thousands of years before Christianity, ancient Egypt knew of a last judgment. Man's sins are weighed against what he truly is, the feather of truth, his essence, the lightness that remains when he has shed all else. This was a civilization that quested for a truth within.
You know, today our worldview by our scientists tell us that the truth is out there and we have to search outside. But to the ancient Egyptians, they said that the truth was in here and the search was within, inside. They believed that inside the individual is the spark of divinity. And in order to teach themselves inwardly, to expand that spark, to bring it to its full maturity, They had to speak to it internally in a language that they call the language of divinity, the language of the gods. Now, how do they perceive this language? Well, the cosmos, if they are part of it, then they must communicate with it. They communicate by sensing, by getting messages from the wind, the stars, the moon, the fertility of the land, the birth of their children. This is the language of nature, this is the language of the cosmos. But they began to understand that you could convert, codify this language in a sacred language of symbols. You could symbolize cosmic principles. This is the beginning of sacred writing. This is why writing was invented. Indeed, they tell us that the invention of the sacred writing was from the gods.
Thought, God with the ibis head, God of knowledge, divine messenger, who taught the magic symbols of writing. It was Thought who initiated Isis into the magic of reincarnation. The Frenchman Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphs with this Rosetta Stone, but did he do justice to the magic of thought, or are we, with our phonetic alphabet of 26 letters, just scratching the surface?
The Egyptians had a better system. The Egyptians, for one thing, had 780 letters in the writings, and they studied every single one of them. And each sign, each symbol was charged. So when they conveyed an idea, they chose the right symbol, the right sign. One very good example that we all know is the cross. The Christian cross is a symbol. If you are not aware of what it represents, then all you see is a cross. But of course, to a Catholic priest initiated into the cult of Christianity, a cross signifies everything about Christianity. So rather than think of this as some sort of superstitious mumbo-jumbo, the hieroglyphics are the window behind which lies a whole powerful initiatory cult.
In the same sense, Egyptians would make little of this symbol into which every Catholic is initiated.
Blood of Christ.
The mystery of Eucharisty. Beauval believes that ancient Egypt spoke in symbols, and that their magic may still speak to us today, even if we fail to understand it. In the centuries after the Pyramid Age, 2500 BC, religious concepts blurred as different gods dominated different epochs. But the Osiris myth withstood the time, even as the name Osiris eventually changed into Serapis.
Temples of Serapis and Isis could be found as far as England, Germany, temples in France.
As from the 1st century AD, the cult spread throughout the Roman Empire to vie for supremacy, with Christianity on the rise. And it even influenced Christianity itself.
Within the Christian movement developed a faction that had absorbed the idea that in order to attain divine state, one had to acquire knowledge through the internal search. This very much came from the ancient Egyptian initiated religion.
Alexandria, Egypt, a place of initiation for adherents of an old faith and a new one. Here, early Christians came to find gnosis, knowledge from the heart through initiation. For that they needed no church, no hierarchy, only to face themselves and meet God.
This, in a sense, represents the underworld, the tenebrous regions where initiates and make contact with the divinities. It is light getting into darkness and finding a way into the afterlife kingdom. The portals of immortality, the portals that led to an afterlife, was through death. And therefore the initiates would come down here in absolute black darkness, perhaps with no torches whatsoever, and would come here and imbue the mood of the place and find themselves in a peculiar position of interface. They were that close, they believed, where one can transit from life, death, and rebirth. The people who came here were early Christians, and yet they were the link between the ancient Egyptian mystery cults and the Gnostic religion. The Gnostic religion is, in a sense, the ancient Egyptian mystery cult Christianized. So here we have the resurrection events performed through the mummification rituals. We see Anubis over the mummy. Thoth, now called Hermes by the Greeks. Here we are in the 2nd century of Christianity, and yet we see early Christians perform the rituals of the ancient Egyptians, presenting the feather of truth, the symbol of truth, to the divinity. And this was a time when Christianity had not yet formulated its iconography or its symbols or even its myth.
Christianity shape its myth? Of the 4 Gospels, there's one which has shaped our idea of nativity. Mary as the Holy Mother of a divine child Jesus, and strangely links the story to Egypt, the Gospel of Matthew.
The Matthew Gospel is unique for 3 things, all related to the nativity story. 1, the Magi. They come from the east and they follow a star. That's the second thing, the Star of the East. Thirdly, he has the Holy Family escaping to Egypt, the massacre of the infants by Herod, and coming to Egypt and taking refuge at Heliopolis.
A Christian church near Heliopolis depicts the Holy Family's escape to Egypt.
And the tradition is so much alive today that when they did this painting, they modeled the tree on the one that supposedly the Holy Family rested. This story appears in only one Gospel, the Gospel of Matthew. Now we know that the Gospel of Matthew was written in the city of Alexandria in Egypt. So what did the writer have in mind?
Beauval believes Matthew developed the icon of the Holy Mother and the Divine Child to speak to the Egyptians, to whom that icon was more than familiar.
What is the most powerful icon of ancient Egyptian religious cult is indeed this goddess Isis holding the divine infant on her lap. They're trying to market a new religion here, a new divine child, to people who have believed for 3 millennia that the divine child was the divine child of Isis. He actually, in a sense, hijacked the stellar myth of Isis and Horus and the star Sirius and grafted it on the Christian mythology.
There is yet an even more powerful way that the ancient Christian myth makers injected the Isis myth into their new religion. They made use of a star, the Star of the East, the Star of Bethlehem. Could this star be the Star of Isis, ancient star of divine birth?
After 3,000 years, due to the phenomena of precession, the time of rising and setting of Sirius changed. At the time of the birth of Jesus, that star would appear at around the time of the winter solstice, not the summer solstice as the ancient Egyptian, around the 25th of December to be precise, just after sunset. Now, we know that the Jews and Christians celebrated the changing of the day at dusk, not at dawn like the ancient Egyptian, at sunset. Therefore, here is the interesting thing. On the 25th of December, they would see the constellation of Orion rising, and just after sunset, the star Sirius would rise over the horizon. And this was the very same image that the ancient Egyptians had seen for thousands of years to celebrate the birth of the divine child Horus.
So could it be that the star of the Nativity be drawn from an ancient myth and grafted onto the new religion of Christianity.
And were even the three magi setting out for the birth star shaped to suit with ancient myth in Egypt?
The constellation of Orion, with the three bright stars forming the belt, would rise as if heralding, as if announcing the birth of Sirius. Now, it is only Matthew who mentions the Magi's in his Gospel. Could this explain why the three stars in Orion's belt were identified to the three Magi's?
It's evident if you study the myth and the history together that those who wrote it saw Isis in the mother of Jesus. And then later on, she developed her own identity as Mary, and the Isis part of her withdrew. But certainly originally it was Isis. These mythic images are alive, and they evolve and change. And so nothing can be static and nothing can be said, that is the way it is for one time and one time only.
In its first centuries, Christianity is torn by theological debate. An Orthodox church with a growing hierarchy of priests and bishops confronts Gnostics who seek God within themselves. The fundaments of faith are contested. The nature of Christ as God's Son fiercely debated.
God was not always the Father, once he was not.
Being agnostic meant being against the Orthodox Church, because the Gnostic did not recognize the established church. He did not need the establishment. He communicated directly with God. He did not need an interpreter.
A faith of individuals, which is drawing increasing interest.
At its heart is the principle of relationship with divinity. Personal, no priest, no hierarchy, no administrative phenomenon, no leader. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to power structures, fatally dangerous.
Nicaea 325 AD. Constantine, the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, has called the bishops. As a statesman, he opts for orthodoxy and the support of a powerful hierarchy.
Fellow ministers, we believe in one God.
What he decrees will define the Christian faith until today.
And in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten from the Father, God from
the
God.
The Gnostic Gospels burned. Christians kill fellow Christians by countless thousands. Gnostics and everything pagan are wiped out. The Serapeum, Alexandria's Temple of Osiris, and its great library go up in flames.
And what replaced the system of knowledge and gnosis was blind faith, which eventually led to the monks' an ascetic and dryness of an establishment that imposed their doctrines and dogmas on the population. We're now at the most incredible crossroad of world culture. Here is Filat, where the last stand of Egyptian culture and Egyptian religion stands, the great temple of Isis. But the Christian mobs finally make their way here with their hammers and their chisels, and they throw themselves on what they consider to be the pagan image and start chiseling. And the priests beg them, stop, this is the most sacred temple of Egypt. This is the temple of the Mother Goddess. Thousands of years, your Mother Goddess. You have a Mother Goddess. You have your own. And they beg the monks to take over this temple and use it as a Christian sanctuary. And here we have it all. In a desperate bid to save the cult of Isis, the Egyptian priests stepped aside and let the new religion absorb its iconography and symbols.
At the close of antiquity, last survivors entrust the Gnostic Gospels and the ancient philosophies to paper and hide it for their persecutors. The Gnostic religious texts have surfaced only recently. The philosophical texts emerge much earlier in Florence, cradle of Europe's reawakening.
In 1460, a monk delivered to Cosimo de' Medici a bundle of books. They turned out to be the Hermetica, the lost works of Hermes Trismegistus, the Egyptian thought. Cosimo asked his translator, Marsilio Ficino, to put aside Plato and translate forthwith the Hermetica. An intellectual bomb was about to explode.
Suddenly, the whole concept of Egyptian wisdom burst into the European consciousness and became supremely important. And for the next 200 or 300 years, it motivated the cutting edge of European art, intellectual endeavour, and thought, philosophy, wisdom in general. Underlying the Corpus Hermeticum is the concept of the power of symbolism. That symbols aren't just something by which you recognize someone or an advertising slogan. Symbols have a much deeper meaning, and they believed that the symbol itself could perhaps bring you towards initiation.
Hermetism became so popular that even the Pope Borgia decorated his apartments at the Vatican with scenes of Osiris and Isis and thought Hermes, as imagined by the Renaissance painters. Here a religion was insinuating itself that was ordered and deemed by some wiser than that of Moses in the Bible.
The Cathedral of Siena shows this image of Hermes Trismegistus, the god Thought, handing over Egypt's wisdom, and the phoenix of creation and ancient Heliopolis. The popes sprinkle Rome with symbols of antiquity and obelisks from Egypt.
By a strange twist of fate, the Pope chose the ancient symbol of Heliopolis, which was a pillar and a cross on top of it, and placed it in the very heart of Christendom. And how ironic that all who come here also admire this symbol of pagan Egypt.
Scholars like the Jesuit Athanasius Kircher study the Egyptian enigmas, but the Church senses danger. Hermeticism inspires new individual ways, away from the interests of the Church. Ideas are banned, books burnt. In 1600, Hermeticism is silenced, as its main proponent, Gordiano Bruno, is dragged before ecclesiastical courts and, despite cruel torture, refuses to renounce his ideas.
The Church had only one way to stop this, and so the unthinkable happened. On a dull September morning, Giordano Bruno was dragged to this place, his mouth gagged, and he was burnt alive. Up to the very last moment, he tried to avert his eyes from the cross that was being brandished to his face by the Inquisition priests. And with this, Hermetism took a nosedive and went deep underground.
Hermeticism finds refuge in esoteric societies such as Rosicrucians or Freemasonry. The Grand Lodge of London, heart and headquarters of Freemasonry, resonates with ancient symbols. Initiation in secrets, rites and symbols. Ask any Freemason about links with ancient Egypt and they'll probably laugh it off. Authors Bob Lomas and Chris Knight would have done just that until curiosity got the better of them.
10 years ago, we would have poo-pooed anybody that said what we're saying now. But it's not a straight linear event, but there is a line straight back to Egypt that merged and branched off and rebranched back.
The pyramid with the all-seeing eye, the blazing star, did Egypt's most sacred symbols find their way in Masonic mysteries? In their books, Lomas and Knight investigate the influence of Freemasonry on symbols and institutions of America.
The founders of the United States of America, the majority of them, George Washington, Franklin and others, were Freemasons. At the construction of the White House, they attended there in all their Masonic regalia. And the Constitution of the United States is an extension of the principles of Freemasonry, of democracy and the investment in science and the furtherance of science. It's a Masonic experiment, which in turn is an ancient Egyptian experiment, the principle of doing good for goodness' sake, and outside of a religion. And that's what Freemasonry is today.
In front of the George Washington Masonic Temple stands another familiar symbol. Here, Washington and other founding fathers are honored carrying a Mason's apron. The dollar, symbol of America's might, shows the unknown side of the American seal, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye and the promise of a new order.
It's interesting, for example, that when the president is sworn in, he makes a Masonic symbol, which I can't demonstrate to you because it would contravene my vows as a Freemason. He doesn't explain what it is, but he makes a symbol, and that symbol is the Masonic symbol of fidelity.
So this man also didn't do it just to keep his fingers warm. Napoleon stepped on the world scene as conqueror of Egypt.
When Napoleon came to the gates of Cairo, he did not come as a Christian. He and his army were much imbued with a revolutionary cult that was modeled on Masonic ideals.
Virtually all his generals were Freemasons, and Napoleon himself was initiated during a night he passed alone inside the Great Pyramid.
Napoleon, when he returned from Egypt, was obsessed with the idea that he was under the protection of a star. So much so that this monument, known as the Place de l'Étoile, the place of the star, was put along the central axis of Paris, the Champs-Élysées, and more.
This great artery of Paris lies 26 degrees off east to align it with the Star of Isis, Beauval believes.
This is what the Parisians would see when they looked east, the constellation of Orion rising, and here is the star Sirius just breaking over the horizon, 26.5 degrees to the right of east, in perfect alignment with the axis of the Champs-Élysées.
Some historians say that the name of Paris may be linked to the goddess Isis, because here, where stands the church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, once stood the temple of Isis. And the Romans used to call this place Par Isis, which means near the temple of Isis. Parisis, Paris.
Napoleon was impressed enough to order the star and Isis herself placed on the prow of this ship in the emblem of Paris. The city harbors many references to Isis and Egypt, as on this ceiling of the Louvre Palace. It shows the genius of Paris to whom the future is unveiled, a future that shows Isis, an obelisk and a pyramid at her feet, and an angel heralding the vision.
And here it is, the very same statue towering over the Place de la Bastille, where to celebrate the first year of the revolution, huge crowds gathered here under a statue of Isis. And now, 200 years later, what is it looking at? Well, like in the painting, an obelisk and a pyramid, which was inaugurated in 1984 by President Mitterrand for the bicentennial of the revolution.
Here you have these extremely ancient magical devices placed in the heart of the power places of the world. You can imagine the millions of people walking around for years, and occasionally it grabs the imagination of one. One person will say, well, why is it here? What's it doing here? And it's bound to evoke the magic of the past and what the symbol means.
Symbols which, like hieroglyphs, carry many layers of meaning. As it turned out in 1999, when Egypt had a brilliant idea to usher in a new millennium for television around the world to witness.
5 minutes before 12 o'clock, a helicopter will come with this capstone and will put it in the top of the pyramid. You know, you have to imagine this will be the most exciting moment in history.
That capstone had been missing for thousands of years, and this seemed a marvelous stunt to promote Egypt. But this was a symbol with more to it.
There's been suggestion that, apart from it being a Masonic symbol, that it is going to represent the time when the Masonic ideals are brought to fruition and inaugurate a new world order. It's precisely what it says on the American dollar, that there is a new world order on its way.
Or, as an influential occult prophet, Edgar Cayce had foretold the coming of a new Messiah. Or was it a new Horus? For the first time in thousands of years, Sirius, the birth star of Isis, would appear precisely above the pyramid at the very turn of the year. Ancient Egypt wrote Isis with two symbols, a star over a triangle. At the placing of the capstone at the turn of the millennium, the skies over Giza would have cried out, "Isis, Isis."
You know, symbols have a funny way of causing changes of ideas. And therefore I'd like to see it, just because it pleases me to see it this way, as some sort of ancient magic, something we don't understand, something that is there to tease us and to remind us that all isn't rational and that we live in a magical world that we haven't fully understood.
But Egypt celebrated the millennium without television worldwide. A radical Islamic press fiercely condemned the event as a capitalist plot and a coup of Freemasonry. The party went off without the capstone. Still, why do these symbols of the past still speak to us?
Egypt is important not because it's the sole place in the world where profound things happened, but because the decor of Egypt, you might say, startles us and reminds us that humanity in the past did fantastic things and had mystical and spiritual experiences that were important to its survival. And we want to reconnect with those experiences. And I believe that hunger exists very, very widely in our time.
The Giza Plateau, this expression of the Osirian religion and the Isis religion, was there before Christianity. It is there to stay. And it may even outlast Christianity.